Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Brainbean here again, and my last video of the Glorious Pandas had some mistakes in it that were just kind of inexcusable bonehead calls on how to do the sound test that really didn't give the Switch a fair shake. I done f***ed it up. And here on this channel, I think it's really important to provide accurate information for those of you that are using these videos as tools to make informed decisions. So I think it's my responsibility to go back and make some corrections and get it right for you. So with that, let's do it right. Unfortunately, nobody can be told what Matrix Keyboards is. You just have to see it for yourself. You can take the blue keycap and keep your stock ABS cheap keycaps and believe whatever you want to believe. Or you can take the red keycap. We'll browse Reddit mechanical keyboards, and I'll show you how far down the rabbit hole goes. You don't have to be the chosen one to see that Matrix Keyboards has some of the best keycap sets in the game right now. The quality is top-notch thanks to their durable double-shot PBT construction, and with a bunch of vibrant and stylish two-tone colorways to choose from, there's sure to be something to pop off any setup. So don't settle for stock keycaps anymore and give your keyboard the love it deserves. Grab a set at matrixkeyboards.com today and use coupon code BRAINBEAN for 10% off your purchase. You think those are keycaps you're typing on now? So I do want to reiterate for those of you that didn't see the first video just what the Holy Panda Switch is and what makes it so great. So originally the Holy Panda Switch was born as sort of an amalgamation between two different switches. So initially we had Invir, which came out with the Panda Switch, which was renowned for having a really great quality casing but kind of a so-so stem. Later on, we had Input Club develop the Halo True Switch, which was regarded as sort of the opposite, having a really nice quality, nice tactile feeling stem, but not the greatest casing. So of course, naturally, a smart human comes along and decides, why not take the best from both worlds, smash them together. You've got the Panda Switch, the Halo Switch, Halo Panda, Holy Panda. It's genius. So now that we have the Holy Panda Switch, people started to really have the Switch catch on, and eventually it ends up reaching sort of legendary status in the enthusiast community just for having a really great tactile feel, a nice force curve, and just being an overall really great Switch. But because it was sort of a hybrid, it was very difficult to get your hands on, and unless you participated in some group buys on things like drop.com, it took a long time to be able to get them. And in fact, I pre-ordered some Holy Pandas about 6 months ago or so and just got them last month. So 5 months is a long time to wait. And unfortunately, that's part of our hobby that we've sort of had to get used to, whether it's keycap group buys or switches or keyboard kits, any of that kind of stuff. There's really not a lot of readily available stuff on the shelf. And this is where Glorious comes in. Much like Matrix Keyboards with their off-the-shelf PBT keycap sets that are making a lot of different styles available to the masses, Glorious is doing the same thing with the Holy Panda Switch, where now they're calling it the Glorious Panda Switch. And the main differences here is that they do have the original tooling for Invir's casing that they're using, and they have some slight tweaks to the stem of the Switch, mainly just a little bit less pre-travel and slightly different materials, although I think the overall feel is very similar. But the main thing here is that they're providing this Switch just off the shelf at a much more reasonable cost. So you'll be able to pick up a set of 36 Glorious Pandas for 25 bucks, which compared to a group buy, usually you're paying about 10 to 15 bucks for 10 switches of Holy Pandas. So it's a much better deal there. The materials are slightly different. You do have an all copper leaf, which I think is a little bit better quality on Glorious's Switch versus the original Holy Panda Switch. The springs are about the same, 67 grams. And then you have the actual stem, which the main difference I notice here is that the pre-travel is just a little bit less, but in switching back and forth between the two switches, I didn't really notice that too much. Also, you'll notice that the color of the stem on the Glorious Holy Panda is more of a mustardy yellow, whereas the original is obviously that creamy Halo True color. Getting into the actual quality of the switches, one thing I noticed is that if you look at the casing on the Glorious Holy Panda Switch versus the original Invir casing on the Holy Panda, is that there's some mold lines visible on Glorious's Switch, as well as like kind of imperfections where they've clipped the plastic off of the sprue, which is going to be the byproduct of any injection molding sort of process with anything plastic. But you don't notice that on Invir's Switch, which kind of just gives you the impression of overall lesser quality or more of a mass-produced feel. Now, in Glorious's defense, will you notice any performance issues because of that little blemish? No, none whatsoever. Will you have even a aesthetic difference because it's covered up by a keycap? No, none whatsoever. So really, it's a very forgivable issue, but still something I think is worth pointing out. But let's talk about how it actually performs. So in my original video, I thought it would be smart to do a side-by-side sound comparison of the original Holy Panda Switch and the Glorious Panda Switch. And because I didn't have two exact like keyboards that were hot swappable, I tried to find the next best option, having a Alt keyboard and a Control keyboard, which essentially use the same case, and then Krytox 205 in both switches, as well as PBT matrix keycaps on top of both to try to have the most, cohesive sound test possible. What I didn't consider was that the different size cases will make different resonance depending on how big they are and how much sound reverberates around the case, which makes complete sense, but sometimes I just don't use my brain. So what I decided to do this time was just a normal sound test of regular Holy Pandas in my Alt, swap them out, put the new Glorious Pandas in the same keyboard with the same keycaps and everything, and then also do another test side by side with half the keyboard being the Holy Pandas, half the keyboard being the Glorious Pandas. And that's what I'm going to play for you guys right now so that you can take a listen. Now, as you guys can hear, the sound difference is definitely a lot less pronounced in this sound comparison, although I do still think there is a difference. Now, I know a couple of guys out there are still saying that they don't really notice that much of a difference, and I do agree there, but I am still noticing somewhat of a difference in sound. The original Holy Panda Switch has sort of a more muted, slightly higher pitched kind of feel to it, whereas the Glorious Panda definitely has more of a thok to it, and more of that sort of like knocking two 2x4s together, some kind of more resonant, thocky sound, which could be definitely more appealing to some people. Another thing is, like I mentioned in the original version of this video, there's a more slippery, slidey plastic feel to the Glorious Pandas. And actually, after the last video, I used that switch for the rest of the day in my keyboard instead of my Holy Pandas, and really gave it a little bit more time to use because, I really wanted to revisit what I was feeling and try to narrow that down. So let's talk about the overall difference in feel on the switches. I do find that, like I said in my original video, that the Glorious Pandas have more of a kind of slippery, plasticky feel to them, whereas the Holy Pandas have a more solid, smooth feel to them. Almost feels like the plastic is slightly more textured, even though they have the same lube. And also it feels like the components are rubbing a little bit closer together than the Glorious Pandas do. Don't really notice a lot of rattle in the Pandas, but it does feel like a slightly looser fit almost. Another thing is that the bump on the Glorious Pandas, while having a slightly reduced pre-travel, is like a smoother, rounder feeling bump, whereas the Holy Pandas have sort of more of a bump you really need to push through. I do think the Glorious Pandas will give you slightly better feel of smoothness and performance when you're doing things like gaming or just as an all-arounder switch. And I do want to point out too that I didn't lube the tactile bumps on either switch, so that will be the same in terms of the comparison. And I think a lot of it might boil down to the type of plastic that they used for it. I'm not 100% sure there. Now for me personally, I still prefer the OG Holy Panda feel because of that reason, with sort of the slippery feeling to them. Now I really liked the feeling of Halo Clears, which is an even heavier switch, which I should point out they both use the same 67 gram force curve that the Holy Panda and the Glorious Panda use. But, you know, that's the thing with switches, right? I mean, it's all down to personal preference. And if you're somebody that's going from something like a Cherry MX Brown switch, for example, or some other tactile switch like a Roamer G, or, you know, some of these more like mass-produced, not as considered good, you know, tactile switches, but you really want a solid feeling tactile switch, the Glorious Panda is definitely going to give that to you. And if you were to ask me if you should wait for a group buy and spend the extra money and jump through all the hoops to get a real official Holy Panda switch, I really don't think it makes that much difference. I would just recommend buying them from Glorious because the experience you're going to get is basically the same. And I know I've made a lot of comparisons and talked about what's different and stuff like that, but you got to realize when it comes to mechanical keyboard switches, a lot of these differences we're talking about, whether it's actuation distances or forces or all these different things, are such minute measurements, whether it's measuring force curves in grams or distance in millimeters. It's so small that when you're actually using the switch to, you know, the untrained finger, or even most people really, you're not going to notice much of a difference at all. So I would highly recommend checking out the Glorious Pandas if you want a fabulous tactile switch. Just keep in mind it's going to be a little bit heavier, so if you're used to using things like Cherry MX Browns, you will have to kind of train your fingers to build up a little bit more muscle. You'll kind of tire out a little bit, especially for gaming and stuff, but it comes pretty quick. But other than that, guys, let me know in the comments down below what you think about these switches, and also if this video was better than the first one. Hey, I appreciate you guys calling me out because it is very important for me to provide accurate information and do things right. And hey, I'm not perfect. I'm just a guy that likes to make tech videos about keyboards and stuff like that, but I am not the end-all be-all resource by any means, so I've still got a lot to learn as well. You can give this video a like if you enjoyed it to show your support. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to see more from me, and as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.